Hello, everybody. It's another edition of the Severe MMA preview show. My name is Sean Sheehan, joined today by Paul Brown to look ahead to UFC Fight Night 252, Cejudo versus Song, which goes down in Seattle, Washington. I saw a couple of people saying this was in Seattle, but it never clicked with me. For some reason, up until this very second, I thought this fight was in the Apex, but I'm kind of glad it's not. Are you one of those people, Paul, who hates the Apex? Do you not care? Because I don't really care, but I see a lot of people on the Q&A in different places that they despise it. What's your opinion on the Apex as I turn on my light, which I forgot?
It was a novelty when they first did it, and I'm just sort of over it now, you know. Crowds, I'm all about the crowd. Look, it's different for us, I suppose, when we're watching it on TV, so we maybe don't get the full experience of the crowd, but you can still tell the difference, and the fighters seem to just thrive off it a bit more, don't they? And when it's an Apex card, you know that it's just filler fights. You know that there's going to be a lot of guys that are just on there for the sake of ticking a box off on their contract, whereas when they're putting together a card to put in front of a room of like 15,000 screaming fans, they'll usually kind of try to fit in a few names that are going to get those fans off their seats. So yeah, I do prefer now when like one like this. I think there's going to be a bit more excitement to it, you know.
Though, speaking of the better fights, I suppose they were making a few fights have fallen off this card. So I'm just looking at the cancelled fights here. So Kellen Vieira versus
7 of them, yeah.
Messi Chaisen, yeah. Edson Barboza versus Steve Garcia, Adam Fugat versus Islam Dulatov, Curtis Blades versus Kuniev, Mansour Abdul Malik versus Antonio Tricoli, Rob Font and Dominic Cruz, obviously, and then Fugat, and then Billy Ray Goff as well was another fight that was made that fell off. So I suppose like the Cruz Rob Font fight was a major one. I suppose the Blades Kuniev fight. Blades is local, isn't he, if I'm not mistaken? And Barboza as well when he's not on the card. Imagine if that was in Ireland and all of those fights got taken off the card. I think we'd be pretty mad about it. So it's tough. It's tough on those people going to watch the card. But I think what they have is a pretty good main event, an interesting main event, and one that I think we can speculate a lot on. And it's funny, I was thinking about this fight a lot over the last few days, and I was like watching a bit of the Henry Cejudo fight yesterday, and a bit of a few of his fights yesterday and today, and then I was like, all the news coming in of like, Luke Rockhold is fighting Weidman, and what was the other one? Hidden Barrow and Uriah Faber. And it's not obviously not as bad as this. But I'm thinking to myself, like, how do we analyze those fights? Like, how do we analyze where Uriah Faber is? Like, Hidden Barrow was a way better fighter than him at the time, but is he a better fighter than him now? It's hard to know. This is, I think, a similar sort of thing with Henry Cejudo. Like, it's been a minute since he won a fight. He came back and he obviously fought twice not too long ago. But it's very hard to judge a guy as well when he fought Merab Dvalishvili and Aljamain Sterling in those last two fights, in his only two fights in literally 4.5, 5 years. When you're doing your analysis of this, I know you have a couple of previews out for it, and obviously we're sitting down here to talk about it as well. How do you go about analysing Henry Cejudo coming into this fight? It's not that easy, is it?
It really isn't. And, like you mentioned there, he hasn't won a fight since 2020. He hasn't fought in a fight that didn't have title implications since like 2016 or 2017. So, I mean, this one, the previous one against Merab, it was pretty much a number one contender bout because Merab got the title shot off that win and whatnot. And every fight for years before that was a title shot. And of course, Aljamain Sterling was the fight previous to Merab. So he's in there with a really high level of competition. And he did run Sterling pretty close in that fight, to be fair. And I mean, that would, on paper, you would imagine that would kind of indicate that he is still a very, 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 very good fighter, to be able to hang with somebody at that level. But there is just that element of the unknown here because it's been 3 or 4, whatever it is, 5 years since he won a fight. Was it 2020 his last win?
Yeah, Dominic Cruz in 2020, yeah.
So he's going in there now against a guy who's a good fighter, but is, realistically probably never going to challenge for a title. He's going in there against that level. So maybe the proof will be in the pudding. We're going to actually see exactly where his level is this weekend. If he goes in there and smokes Song Yadong, we'll be like, okay, maybe he's not going to win a title again, but he is clearly able to fight with some of the best guys in the division. Whereas if he goes in there and performs okay and loses a close decision to Song Yadong, we'll know that he's a bit of a gatekeeper now and he's no longer one of the best. So we're just going to have to wait and see with this one, I think.
And that's a funny thing about Cejudo as well, because like I actually I slightly disagree in that. I think if he does lose like a close decision to Song, I still don't really think we know where he is, because like it could be very close and he could look okay like he has in his last two. But I think the point that you're making, and I've said it as well, like that. There's a difference between losing a close decision to Sterling or Dashvili and Song. They're a different sort of level. As you said, you don't think Song is going to get to the championship level, and obviously the other two have. So, look, I suppose we'll have to see until Saturday night. But let's speculate for a little while here and talk about the matchup. Like watching those last two fights, and even knowing Cejudo before, look, his style has, I suppose, adjusted an awful lot over the years, where he was obviously started off as very much a wrestler, being an Olympic gold medalist, into someone who had his striking style and was pretty good for him, and then he turned into this Lyoto Machida type karateka with the wrestling behind it. And I think what we saw in the last two fights, especially the Dashvili fight, is like maybe a slowed down version of that. Whether that's on purpose or whether he's slower, I'm not too sure. But maybe it's the fighter that you're fighting against as well. What did you think of him in the last two fights in terms of where he is in his career? Do you think he is slowed down? Do you think he was fighting that way on purpose? What did you think of Cejudo in those two fights?
My hunch is that it's a tactical thing. Like, we've seen it with guys like Yoel Romero, of course, just doesn't do anything for as long as possible in a fight, and he relies on moments because he's older than me, so he kind of he doesn't really go out there and fight like he would if he was 30. Jose Aldo famously just laid off the leg kicks and kind of made his game a little bit more efficient throughout his advancing years, and still managed to do he's still going. Like, I mean, he's still one of the best fighters in the division. So fighters do that. They make little adjustments to account for how they do things. Like, on a smaller scale, if me or one of the people I train with who does a lot of jiu-jitsu gets that little bit older, you modify exactly how and when you go for things and how often and what kind of pace you move at. So that happens as you start to get older and older and older. And I would imagine it's just Cejudo. Just he's a very clever fighter. He always was. So I would imagine it's just a bit of a deliberate ploy on his behalf. That would be my guess.
How do you think that lines up against Song then? Because like we obviously we've seen Song, and I would look. I suppose you describe him as a modern MMA fighter. He can do a bit of everything. Is he spectacular at anything? I don't know. I think the most spectacular thing about him is probably his speed at times. But again, at other times, you don't see it as much. And if Cejudo is slowed down a little bit, maybe he can take advantage of that. First of all, the striking matchup. How do you think that matches up between the two of these?
Yeah, you're right with Song's speed. Like, his hand speed in particular is very good. And that opening round against Piotr Jan, he looked excellent, didn't he? And Jan just had that little bit of wiliness, that little bit of, he's a higher level fighter, that bit better fighter. He was able to make the adjustments, better fight IQ. I have a feeling that if Cejudo is remotely close to where he used to be, he'll be able to sort of figure out a way to get the job done against Song this weekend. But in that respect, but there are questions like that to be asked. Has he dropped off a lot? Because that retirement is just such a poor decision in hindsight. Like, he was top of the pile there, 2-division champion, and tried to play his best hand to the UFC, and they called his bluff, really, didn't they? And we may have seen so many more fights because he was in his pomp then, and he had started late in MMA, so there's that sort of apex where you're physically still just before you start your decline, and he was still he was very young in his career, so he was still getting better very quickly in MMA terms. But now he's probably a decent bit past his physical prime. So can he sort of match, the fight IQ and things like that, the skills that he's put together over the years? Can his body keep up with what he wants it to do? But I suppose we're going to find out. This is the type of test that, it's going to tell us that on Saturday night, I suppose.
Yeah, I remember the last couple of previews we did, we said a similar sort of thing. I remember Ian maybe asked me about like injuries, like would they play a part of it? What fight was that? It was like completely, it was all fucking injuries. What were the issues in the fight? But anyway, like first, I did a bit of idle speculation the other day on Henry Cejudo, and that like he has been so open about his injuries down through the years and like not fought and pulled out of fights or whatever, that I don't know. And Graham used to always say this about Jose Aldo, like he'd never actually fight injured, because like, oh, what's, you know, if it's one more fight, what of it? And I don't know if that's the case with Henry Cejudo, but I'm kind of maybe going off of that logic. And I think if you put that piece together with, you know, as we both spoke about the hand speed of Song and maybe Henry slowing down a bit, I think this could and should be a very wrestle heavy game for Cejudo here. Like, he's wrestling, obviously he's unbelievable and still looked really, really good in the recent fights. You know, he took Merab down and he did really well, obviously, going in there, going up against Merab in the wrestling realm. Now Merab's, you know, his cardio got a bit off, and I think a big part of Cejudo as well in that fight, I think he was a little bit afraid of Merab's cardio, as you probably fucking should be. So, you know, maybe there is an adjustment here as well, and the pace he fought at in that fight might be a tad overblown by me and maybe other people out there as well. But as I said, we'll see on that. But like, I have an awful feeling that Cejudo might use Song's best attributes against him, like get him into that boxing range, you know, strike with him for a little while, get him feeling good, and then just dip underneath and get a couple of those takedowns. Like, he's obviously a lovely single leg, lovely double leg, lovely everything. Like, he's an Olympic fucking gold medalist. Of course, he has all of that in his arsenal, but he's well able to do it at the top level. Like, if you can do it against Merab in that division, you can do it against literally anyone. Are you thinking along the similar lines for Cejudo, or do you think it could be a striking matchup? Like, I've a pretty strong feeling that he's maybe it's not a feeling more so than like a possibility or probability maybe that he's going to wrestle a lot. What do you think?
I'd love to see him do it. And the issue that I find is that, like I mentioned, with fighters, as they get older, sometimes they start to become a bit more efficient in how they approach things. And we've seen so many fighters over the years sort of drift away from that wrestle heavy approach, because you can put in a good 5 minutes where you're dominating someone in the wrestling, and then it can be difficult to get up and do it again in the second round. So it's just the age factor would maybe be a reason that he may not do it, but I would like to see him do it just to see how he looks while he's doing it, because we all like to see like elite level wrestling done really well in an MMA fight. But yeah, I suppose it's a wait and see thing, but it's definitely probably his clearest path to victory for sure.
What's the prediction? So, because like usually when a fighter gets to this level against someone like Henry Cejudo, maybe they haven't the 5-round experience or the top level experience. But to be fair, Song does have that. You know, he's fought twice to a 5th round, fought once to a 4th round. You know, won 2 of those fights. He's fought Petr Yan, he's fought Corey Sandhagen. You know, he's fought a very, very high level of fighter. So that issue isn't there for him, but like, he also lost to both Petr Yan and Corey Sandhagen. To like, who's the best fighter he ever bought? I asked that to myself the other day. It's probably Ricky Simon, you know, maybe Cheeto Vera if you're feeling nice to Cheeto for every once in a while. Like, does Cejudo get it done? Is he too old? What do you think? What's the pick?
I think he does. I think Song is just going to hit that ceiling a little bit again, but like I've been saying all through this, I don't think I'd be surprised if it went the other way at all, because there's a lot of questions coming in about Henry Cejudo in this one. But for me, for quality of fighter, skill set, everything he brings to the table, I think Cejudo he's better than Song in most areas of the game. The big thing is how much has he dropped off? I don't know if he's dropped off that much. Do you know what I mean? Like, he's been in there with some really good guys in his last couple of fights, but when you do drop off, it happens fast. So who knows? But yeah, I'm leaning Cejudo.
Yeah, I think I probably lean Cejudo as well. I just think that wrestling might be the X factor. Like, I'm bad with guys like Song, because at one stage I was like, yeah, I'm all over this guy. Like, I'm not sure if he's going to be a champion, but I think he's going to be one of the best fighters in this division for a while. And then he loses, and I'm like, nah, he's useless. That type of thing. So the truth's probably somewhere in the middle. Like, I don't know. I also, like, sometimes I have a fear in fights like this that I'm just being like the old man, and I know Henry Cejudo is like, jeez, I know it's like picking Dublin or Kilkenny in a GM match, like, you know, it's like or Kerry maybe even, like, jeez, you couldn't pick against him, even though, like, you know, Limerick are better or whatever. But I'm still picking Cejudo. I'm going Cejudo anyway. We'll that wrestling, I can't ignore it, but we'll see. Let's touch on a couple of other fights here. Speaking of not being able to ignore the wrestling, like, I always like to look at fights from every side, or try to like, and I don't really like giving picks, to be honest, even though I just tried to force one out of you there and gave one myself. But like, I'd rather look at the fight and then let's see how it goes, and then we can talk about it afterwards. I cannot see, when I see Fluffy Hernandez against most people these days, I just can't see any other way than Fluffy just drowning him. Absolutely drowning him. Like, I don't like to ask the question, does Brendan Allen have any chance? But I'm going to throw it at you. Does Brendan Allen have any chance here against Fluffy Hernandez?
If he gets to his back, that's his bread and butter, isn't it? But I mean, they've met before. They fought for the LFA title a few years back, and Fluffy, I think it was a 5-round decision, but he won kind of convincingly enough. So, there's going to be an old rivalry dragged back up there. But yeah, we saw Brendan Allen in his last fight, didn't we, against Imavov? He kind of hits a bit of a ceiling as well. So it's like, this is a very tough fight. I think Fluffy Hernandez, even though he is ranked below him, the body of work he's put together, yeah, he's looked a little bit more dangerous than his opponent really at times in certain areas. And if Brendan Allen can't get the fight exactly where he wants it, he's kind of limited in a lot of respect. And Imavov kind of showed a lot of that up. So I would certainly be leaning towards Fluffy Hernandez in this one.
Yeah, it's very hard to look back and see Fluffy Hernandez losing to Kevin Holland, and that's the okay, that was 5 years ago now, so a long time ago. But it's one of those fights when I see it on the record here in Sherdog, I'm just like, well, if Kevin Holland can do it, maybe Brendan Allen can do it, because Brendan Allen's a far superior fighter than Kevin Holland, especially Brendan Allen. Now, like, and I don't like speaking bad about Allen. I do have a lot of respect for him. I think. Like I think both of these guys are fighters that have gotten everything out of themselves, and Brendan Allen's, I think he's become a good technical fighter, and he has made a game for himself. As you said, the submission game is elite. 14 submission wins in his career in 30 fights. That is a high percentage, and 58% of these finishes by submission as well. So. I have an awful lot of respect for that game and what he can do, but I just think a guy, we look at Merab, say, or others that have this drowning, unbelievable cardio game, and like it's very hard to look at a way out of it. Like, even like I look at an Islam or a Habib or those lads, any GSP or any wrestlers back in the day. You could always say, like, if you had very good takedown defense and good technique and ferocious striking, like, you can beat those lads. Now, there's very, very, very few people in the world that have that. But when I look at a guy like Merab or like Fluffy Hernandez, like, you can have all of that. It doesn't matter what you have, and they can still drown you. So, like, it's very hard to look at that fighter against Brendan Allen, who is limited, I would say, while still being very, very good, and think that Allen can beat him. But at the same time, like, Fluffy is limited too if you put him in the wrong place. And Brendan Allen has to put him in the wrong place. But getting him in the wrong place is the toughest thing to do, because he is the master of dominating fights. Like, what if you were to look at that, let's say Fluffy fights Duplessis or whoever the best fighter in the world is, what's the best way to beat him? Like, what's the best way to stop that pressure and stop that drowning cardio game from him or Merab or whoever it might be?
Oh, the big thing is getting your opponent on their back foot. So if someone's game is getting in your face and get a top position and being the hammer, then making them be reactive, and little things like feints and your footwork and your landing those big shots. That's the simplest way of putting it. It's just basically take them away from their A game. And, if he wants to take, let's say, Brendan Allen away from his A game this weekend, which I'm sure he's been doing all camp, he's going to look at his record and see just that pretty much every fight he's ever won has been by rear naked choke. So the last thing you're going to do is you're never going to let him near your back. Do you know what I mean? And a good grappler like Hernandez is probably going to have, like, he's not the type of guy who will engage in a jiu-jitsu type grappling exchange with this guy. He won't be giving him the room to scramble and try and create scrambles, get to the back. And it's about having the right underhooks in the right places and things like that, and just making the fight ugly rather than allowing him the space to work. For Allen, I mean, we don't see him walking guys down. We don't see him really knocking guys out too much. We don't see him jabbing the face off people and just keeping them on the back foot. So He's up against it this weekend. It's going to be a big ask. I would be surprised if he got his hand raised. I'd be definitely leaning towards Fluffy.
Yeah, as would I. As would I. Let's touch on a couple more fights before we go. We were talking briefly before about the John Silva fight, and I think we're both big fans of his. Graham was saying on the podcast at the weekend he's a little bit disappointed with this matchup, and I don't think he's necessarily wrong. What do you think of it? Like you beat Drew Dober in your last fight, coming in here against Melzik Bagdasaryan. It's an odd matchmaking, isn't it?
Yeah, I can't remember who I remember seeing tweeted it the other day going, how do you go from beating Drew Dober to fighting some guy in Seattle? So it's a bit disrespectful, but like that's exactly what I thought when I read the fight card. So he's picked up 3 really good wins. I think his biggest battle this weekend could be the weighing scale, because this is a featherweight again, isn't it? And he fought over at lightweight, and the one prior to that, the Charles Jourdain fight, I think he missed weight as well by a pound or two. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. He's not the biggest featherweight either. It's not like he's a giant at 145, but God, he packs a punch and he makes fights fun, and I'm here for it. You know what I mean? He's coming in here against this Melzik guy who's let me just drag up his record here. Yeah, 3-1 in the UFC, but hasn't really come up against anyone of real name value just yet. This is a huge jump up, maybe in quality for him. So bring it on. I cannot wait to see this fight. I just love watching John Silva fight. I was just catching up on his fights yesterday, and he just makes it so fun. He looks like he's having the time of his life in there, and then he has that one touch power that can just turn anybody's lights out, which just always adds an element of excitement to any fight.
Yeah, and I think behind it as well, like he is well-rounded fighter. Like he can take you down and submit you as well if he needs that. But like he's not going to rely on that at this stage of his career, I think. And for Melzik, look at his record. Like he lost to Josh Kulaba, who is a very good fighter. But like, is Josh Kulaba on the level of John Silva in terms of his all-round game? I wouldn't say so. I think it's going to be tough. Like watching a bit of Bagdasaryan before we started here, and like he's a tricky kind of customer switch stance, but like fighting a lot out of southpaw, and looks to have power in that left hand as well, whether it comes as the backhand or a left hook starting out. And like the big issue with fighters like Silva is if they get too cocky and they run into someone like that who has power, it can end very quickly for them. Now, will it be this weekend? I don't think so, but I really like John Silva's game, like you, and I love guys who just bring it and go with that power. And that Fighting Nerds gym as well just looks like it's on another level at the moment. So I spoke last week about the cards and what they're lacking, and we always have a relatively good main event, maybe a good co-main event, but the really good uber prospect on the undercard is something a lot of these cards have been missing. I think we have it here with John Silva, so that's interesting to see. Not too much to touch on the rest of the card, but there are some interesting guys to look at, and at like an interesting stage of their career. And the three of them I would throw out here are Ricky Simon, or Ricky Simon even, Modestas Bukauskas and Austin Vanderford. Now, Ricky Simon is a very tough matchup against Javid Bashar, coming back off of a loss. Bukauskas is a tough matchup as well against the hard-hitting Rafael Carrera. And Austin Vanderford coming into the UFC short notice. I don't know a whole pile about his opponent. I didn't get a chance to look into him. But out of those 3 lads, who do you think might have a bit of an Indian summer to their career, Paul?
Ricky Simone's up against it really, because he's lost 3 on the bounce in the octagon as well. So he's had a bit of a skid. I mean, his opponent is decent, and he did lose his last fight, but that was to Ayman Zahabi, who's he's a pretty much a handful as well. So he's in there against a good guy. So pressure's on Ricky Simone, and there are other guys in the card that are in that boat as well. There's Ion Cutelaba, of course, has lost a handful of fights as well, and there's if it could be marching orders for either of those fighters should they drop another one this weekend. But out of the ones you mentioned, I'm interested to see how Austin Vanderford looks. He's been okay at times in the Bellator fights that I've watched, but then when he stepped up a level, like when he fought Gegard Mousasi, I mean, he got handled pretty comfortably, didn't he? So I was surprised to see his name being announced as signing with the UFC this week, but I'd imagine it was just sort of a case of the short notice nature. That was that entire fight added this week, do you know, or was his opponent initially matched with somebody else on the card.
Yeah, I think his opponent
There's
was
so many of them.
matched. Yeah, I think so, but I'm not 100% sure. But apparently there was a few different names in the hat for that fight, and I think there was a bit of surprise that Austin Vanderford got it, but. Maybe that's one of those things about it's who you know in the game rather than the game. But like what I think is interesting about that, and maybe we'll finish it off with this, is like I talked about it a little bit on the Q&A, but like people at that level signing for the UFC, like I think we know that the UFC will be looking at your Picos and your MVPs and your Kayla Harrisons and your your Patchy Mix or whoever it might be, and there's always one or two like maybe younger fighters or even down through the years like your Ricky Rainey's and people like that who the UFC just end up picking up. But I think it's the guys. Say like an Austin Vanderford who's a pretty good record, or say even like some of the Irish fighters, like let's say a Nathan Gelly or a Kieran Clark or something like that, or a James Galler or something like that. It's those lads I think who'd been earning good money, who the UFC might look and go, well, will we pick them up or will we not pick them up? I think if they do start picking up those fighters, I actually think it'll be a great benefit for them. And I think it's a good sign Austin Vanderford signed, to be honest, for the UFC and for who they should pick up. Like Norbert Navini is another guy I would 100% pick up if I was the UFC. Like, do you think the UFC do that to kind of make PFL look a bit bad? Like, because it feels like the fan sentiment now is like, pick up these guys and PFL Bellator just let these guys go to a whole new world, and the UFC is now the good guy picking them up. What do you think?
Yeah, you wouldn't be surprised the level of pettiness that Dana White and all those guys have in them at times. I just wouldn't put anything past them. You know what I mean? We'll probably hear something about it in a court case in about 6 or 7 years' time. It'll probably pop up in the cliff notes for a court case that they absolutely did that just to fuck with the PFL.
All right, they changed the contracts now. It's all right. It's fine.
Oh God, I just wouldn't be surprised. But yeah, it was interesting news. But Jesus, it'd be great if it did, like you said, open the floodgates for fighters like that, and you could see the likes of like Derek Kelly and Kieran Clark and guys like that. If they do run into issues where they're maybe not getting the fights or whatnot, and they end up going on and having a career in the UFC, that'd be sensational, But time will tell, I suppose.
Indeed. All right, lads, that's it from us. Thank you very much for tuning in. UFC Fight Night 252. Cejudo versus Zidane goes down this Saturday night. From me and Paul, have a good night of fights, and we'll see you next week. Good luck.